I reminded my husband of his past infidelity after he accused me of being unfaithful. I just had my first baby with my husband, and what should have been the happiest moment of our lives turned into a disaster. A mixed race. My mother is Latina. My father, whom I reconnected with a few years ago, is Black. But I take almost entirely after my mother. Light skin, straight hair, everything. My husband is white. When our son was born, he had darker skin, curly hair, and looked a lot like my father's side of the family. I literally cried when I saw him. He was perfect. But my husband? He froze. He barely held the baby, barely spoke to me, and just started acting really distant. I kept asking him what was wrong, and then he hit me with the question, "Are you sure he's mine?" Excuse me? I was so furious I couldn't even speak at first. I tried explaining genetics to him, even showed him baby pictures of my father's family, but he wouldn't let it go. He straight up asked for a paternity test. I was hurt, but I said yes. What else was I supposed to do? Of course, the test came back proving he was the father. Duh. I thought that would be the end of it, but no. Instead of apologizing, this man says, "Well, how do I know that father of yours is really your father and not just some guy you were sleeping with?" I saw red. Before I could even think, I shot back. "Oh, so now we're accusing each other of cheating? Great, tell Jessica." I said hi. Jessica, the woman he cheated on me with 2 years ago. The affair I stupidly forgave. Now he's mad, saying I'm an awe for bringing up the past and that I went too far. Meanwhile, I'm sleeping in the baby's room, trying not to lose my mind over the fact that he really treated me like a cheater after everything. I can't help but feel completely betrayed. Every night, when I get up to feed our son, I find myself wondering how my marriage got to this point. I don't know if I can move forward after the man I chose to share my life with accused me of something so horrible. Days passed, and his attitude didn't change. He was still distant, barely spoke to me, and when he did, he was cold and dismissive. He only held the baby when absolutely necessary, and every time he did, I noticed the way he looked at him, like he was searching for something to prove the baby was really his. How did we get here? I tried talking to him, tried to make him understand how much this hurt me, but he shut me out. "I need time," was all he said before walking out of the room. Time. Like I didn't need time too. Like I wasn't the one who had just given birth, dealing with postpartum, carrying the weight of his distrust and resentment. That's when I decided I couldn't keep doing this. If he didn't want to accept the truth, if he didn't want to apologize, then I would have to make a decision for both of us. But just when I was about to do it, something changed. One night, I found him in the baby's room, holding him in his arms. I stood at the door, watching silently as he whispered something I couldn't quite make out. I stepped closer, and that's when I heard it. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to embrace him, to tell him everything would be okay, but another part was still furious. Why now? Why not before? I took a deep breath and, with the calmest voice I could manage, asked, "Why did you do this?" He sighed and lowered his gaze. "I don't know. I thought I had moved past my insecurities. But when I saw the baby, it was like all the fear of losing you came rushing back. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself." I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, looking at him, drowning in a flood of emotions. But before I could respond, he continued, "I know I messed everything up. I don't expect you to forgive me quickly, but I want to show you that I regret what I did. Tell me what I can do." And there it was, the apology I had been waiting for. But was it enough? I wasn't sure. The only thing I knew was that, for the first time in weeks, I had the power to decide what happened next. And this time, I wasn't going to let him make that decision for me. The apology was there, but I didn't know if I could accept it. Not yet. The pain was still too raw. And even though I wanted to believe in his remorse, a part of me still didn't trust him. The following weeks were tense. Though he made efforts to reconnect, they weren't enough. I still slept in the baby's room, and our interactions were cold, measured, like we were both afraid of triggering another fight. But little by little, I started noticing small changes. He got up at night to feed the baby when I was too exhausted. He became more involved in his care, looking at him with genuine tenderness instead of the painful doubt that had clouded his gaze before. More than anything, I saw how he tried to reach out to me in subtle but meaningful ways. Still, I wasn't ready. Until one night, in the middle of the night, I found him in the baby's room again. He was holding his tiny hand, his face filled with sadness and guilt. I stopped at the door, watching silently, wondering if this time I would dare to speak. Finally, I did. "Why did you do this?" I knew he had already answered before, but I needed to hear it again. I needed him to be completely honest this time, without hesitation. He lifted his head, startled by my presence. For a moment, he hesitated, but then he took a deep breath, because I was afraid. I thought that if the baby didn't look like me, if people started questioning it, you would eventually realize that I wasn't enough for you. Those words hit me harder than I expected. You're not enough for me because you doubted me, not because of what people might say about our son. My voice was tired, but it was the truth. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to absorb the weight of his actions. "I know," he whispered, "and every single day I regret not believing you. But if you let me try, I want to prove to you that I can be better. I don't know if I can ever earn your forgiveness, but I want to try." That night, I stayed with him in the baby's room. I didn't forgive him, not yet, but for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to consider the possibility of doing so. Months passed, and although our relationship remained fractured, there was an effort on his part that I couldn't ignore. He became a present father, someone who genuinely loved and cared for our son without hesitation. His actions spoke louder than any apology, but the damage was done, and the wound he left in me didn't heal easily. Despite the efforts, despite his attempts to get closer, I still felt that distance between us. I couldn't help it. One afternoon, I decided to take a break and go out with my mother and the baby. I needed to clear my mind, to get away from that house where everything reminded me of betrayal and distrust. It was during that walk that my mother, who had been patient throughout this whole process, finally decided to speak. "Sweetheart, I know this has been hard for you, but you need to ask yourself something. Do you really want to keep living like this?" That question stayed in my mind for days. What did I really want to do? A part of me still loved him. Another part of me didn't know if I could ever trust him again. I spent sleepless nights thinking about what it would mean to move forward with him or what it would mean to leave. Each possibility was painful, but also necessary. Eventually, the moment came when I had to make a decision. And no matter what that decision was, I knew it would change our lives forever. The nights were still long, but in a different way. It wasn't just the exhaustion of having a baby, the sleepless nights listening to his cries or feeding him while struggling to stay awake. Now they were filled with thoughts that wouldn't leave me alone. Thoughts about him, about us, about whether I could ever feel safe in our relationship again. There were days when I found myself smiling with him, when the memory of his betrayal faded temporarily. But those moments were fleeting, and the distrust always came back with force, like a shadow clinging to my chest. I tried to ignore it. I tried to force myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could feel the way I used to. But it wasn't that simple. Couples therapy became an option. He brought it up one day, his voice nervous, and for a moment, I wanted to reject it outright. But wasn't this what I had been waiting for? Didn't I want him to make a real effort to fix what he had done? So I agreed. The first sessions were hard. It was difficult to speak without feeling attacked, difficult to listen without getting angry again. Our therapist guided us with patience, helping us understand that while he had made an unforgivable mistake, there had to be a process if we wanted to heal. But that was the big question. Did I really want to heal with him? The therapist spoke to us about trust, about how it was like a rope that, once broken, never went back to being the same. It can be repaired, he said, but it will never be the same rope. That phrase stuck with me. How broken was our rope? Was it worth the effort to weave it back together, to trust in a new knot instead of the original integrity? Meanwhile, our son kept growing. His laughter was a reminder that no matter what happened between us, he would always be my priority. And in moments of doubt, I clung to him like an anchor, because if everything fell apart, at least I would have him. It was during one of those therapy sessions that my husband revealed something I never expected. It wasn't just the fear of you leaving me, he confessed. It was the fear that I was never enough, that sooner or later you'd find a reason to walk away from me. And when I saw the baby, when I saw that he looked more like your father's side of the family than me, it was like that insecurity exploded. And not justifying it, but that's what happened. I didn't know what to say. On one hand, I wanted to feel empathy. On the other, it felt like he was just trying to excuse his actions. Was he really that insecure, or was he just finding another way to avoid responsibility for his doubts? Weeks passed, and with them, the attempts at rebuilding. Sometimes it felt like we could make it. Other times, the wound opened again, reminding me that the pain hadn't disappeared. One day, without planning to, I found myself sitting in the kitchen with my mother, telling her everything. She listened without interrupting, without judging, with the patience only a mother could have. And when I finished, when there were no more words left in my throat, she took my hand and said, "You're not obligated to stay. You're not obligated to leave either. But whatever you choose, do it for yourself, not for him." Her words hit me deep. How much of what I was doing was because I truly wanted to save our marriage, and how much was because I felt like I had to. That night, I watched my husband as he slept on the couch. He had stayed there out of habit, because even though things had slightly improved, I still couldn't share the same bed with him. And as I observed him, I couldn't help but wonder, was there really something here worth saving? I didn't have the answer. Not yet, but I knew I would have to find it soon. The nights remained cold, though not because of the weather, but because of the distance still between us. I had decided to give the relationship time, but was that truly what I wanted? Or was I just afraid of making the final decision? As the days passed, our son grew at an astonishing rate. His first smiles and babbles filled the house with a joy that sharply contrasted with the silent tension between us. I found refuge in those moments, in his laughter, in the warmth of his skin against mine, in the certainty that no matter what happened, at least I would always be his mother. He, on the other hand, was making noticeable efforts. He tried to be present, to show that he was committed to his role as a father. And although I saw him trying, the wound in my heart still throbbed painfully. Could I truly forgive him? Could I forget his lack of trust? One afternoon, as I folded the baby's clothes, he approached and sat beside me. He remained silent for a moment before finally speaking. "I've been thinking about everything," he said, his voice tense. "I know I can't ask you to forget what I did, but I want you to know that I regret it more than I can express. Not just because I hurt you, but because I ruined what we had." I took a deep breath, not lifting my gaze. "It's not just about apologizing," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about rebuilding trust, and I don't know if that's possible." He nodded slowly, as if he had already expected that answer. "I understand, and I'll accept that no matter what you decide. But I want to try, not because I feel obligated, but because I love you, and because I love our son." Those words hit me hard. I didn't know what to say, so I simply stayed silent. I couldn't deny that a part of me still wanted to believe in him, wanted to feel the security we once had. But the other part of me still remembered the pain, the betrayal, the feeling of being utterly alone at the moment I needed support the most. The days continued to pass, and each small action of his was a reminder of the internal battle I was fighting. He brought me breakfast, woke up in the middle of the night to take care of the baby, even started attending individual therapy to work on his insecurities. This was everything I had hoped for, everything I had wanted since everything fell apart. But then, why did it still feel like something was missing? It was during a conversation with my best friend that I was finally able to put into words what had been tormenting me. What if I can never feel safe with him again? What if, no matter how much I try, there's always that shadow of doubt? I asked, feeling the tears well up in my eyes. She sighed and took my hand. "Then maybe the question isn't whether you can forgive him," she said, "but whether you truly want to. Because forgiving doesn't mean things will go back to how they were. It just means you're willing to move forward, whether that's with him or without him." Those words stayed with me for days. I found myself trapped in a maze of emotions, caught between the hope of rebuilding what we had and the certainty that sometimes love isn't enough to repair the damage. And as our son slept in my arms one night, I realized something. Whatever my decision was, I had to make it soon, because staying in this emotional limbo wasn't just hurting me, it would eventually affect our son too. He deserved happy parents, whether together or apart, and I deserved clarity, a final answer that I wasn't yet sure I had. But I knew the time to decide was coming. Soon, the moment to decide finally arrived. I had postponed it for too long, clinging to the hope that somehow my heart would find a clear answer without me having to force it. But reality was different. I couldn't stay in this state of indecision any longer, not just for myself, but for our son. That night, after putting the baby to sleep, I found my husband sitting in the living room. The dim blue glow of the television lit his face, but his expression was somber. I knew he had been waiting for this moment just as much as I had. I sat beside him, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I can't keep doing this," I said softly, feeling my throat tighten with emotion. "I can't keep fighting this internal battle, this uncertainty. It's not fair to either of us." He nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on his hands. "I know," he whispered. "I've seen how much this hurts you, how hard you've tried to trust me again. And as much as I wish for things to go back to how they were, I also know that some things just can't be repaired." Tears welled up in my eyes before I could stop them. "I loved you so much," I admitted, my voice breaking. "But love isn't enough when trust has been broken like this. I tried to get back what we had. I tried to forgive, but there's something inside me that just can't forget." A long silence followed. Then he took a deep breath and nodded. "If leaving is what you need to be happy, then I'll accept it, because the last thing I want is to keep causing you pain." I looked at him, feeling the weight of months of anguish begin to lift. It wasn't easy. It wasn't what I had imagined for us, but it was the right thing to do. We agreed to go our separate ways, but to do so with respect, always prioritizing our son. There would be no resentment, no unnecessary fights. Just two people who had once loved each other, accepting that time and mistakes had led them down a different path. The days that followed were a mix of sorrow and relief. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from guilt. Free from the burden of trying to fix something that could no longer be repaired. The day he moved into his new apartment, we said goodbye without dramatics. Just a simple look of mutual understanding. Then I closed the door and took a deep breath. My son slept peacefully in his crib, unaware of everything that had happened. I walked over to him and pressed a soft kiss to his forehead. "I will always be here for you," I whispered, "and that will never change." And with that certainty, I allowed myself to look toward the future with renewed hope.